Welcome the learner to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a country that, well, it dominates the headlines, Russia. Our aim here is to cut through some of that daily noise, explore the deeper currents of Russian thinking and history. It's really about getting to the heart of why things are the way they are.
Exactly. And instead of jumping straight to judging or taking sides, we really want to try and understand the underlying motivations, the historical forces at play. As a philosopher, I just find it essential to grasp the full context before forming conclusions. We'll try and uncover some of the nuance that's often overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And to help guide us, we're drawing from some fascinating insights from Evert van der Swerde. He's a professor of political philosophy, a longtime Russia expert, and his perspective is, well, it's both really deeply informed and also refreshingly personal. So, yeah, join us as we kind of embark on this exploration. Okay, let's begin by tackling what seems like Russia's most striking paradox, its identity. It gets described as very European and at the same time very much not European. It's this duality that runs deep, almost like, the subtle but really significant difference between CCCP and SSFR on paper. Looks similar, means something else.
It's true. And, even within Russia, there's often this profound love-hate relationship with their own nation. Van der Swerde talks about his personal journey into understanding this, starting way back in 1984, deep in the Cold War. He found that learning the language, and actually, crucially, the street language, that was the key to connecting with people. It highlights how Russia, while maybe less exotic on the surface than, say, China or Japan, holds this deeply distinct and often pretty surprising character.
So where does this duality, this tension actually come from? Our source points to this blend of what he calls an inferiority complex and megalomania. I mean, think about it. They defeated Napoleon, a huge victory, yet still felt culturally, economically kind of behind France. They seem to aspire to be part of Europe, but then also frequently reject it, call it decadent.
Right. It's this powerful mix, immense pride on one hand and this deep-seated insecurity on the other. And it creates this dynamic where any perceived weakness sort of fuels this compensatory drive for greatness, for recognition. This fundamental tension, this push and pull, you see it playing out in Russia's grand, often utopian projects, like the ambition to build a whole socialist society just within its own borders. But this is always coupled with these moments of, well, profound humility and immense historical suffering. The core insight here, I think, is that Russia's identity is just perpetually navigating this internal conflict. And that makes its actions often appear contradictory if you're looking from the outside.
A perpetual pendulum swing.
Yeah, exactly. Between wanting to emulate the West and emphasizing this unique, specific Russian path. Think of that 19th century idea of bypassing capitalism's horrors, like child labor, to build a better socialist society. It's that drive to do it differently, maybe even better.
Okay, so how does this paradoxical identity, this love-hate relationship with itself, how does that actually manifest on the ground? Because it seems deeply woven into Russia's geography, too. I mean, the sheer size. Picture a country spanning 11 time zones. 11, covering half the globe, stretching from northern Norway's tip down to a region near Barcelona. What kind of impact does that sheer scale have on the people, on governing?
Well, governing such an immense and diverse land, it truly presents a unique challenge. I mean, it's vast. You've got over 140 different nationalities, with ethnic Russians making up, about 70%? So there's this deep-seated historical fear of disintegration. It's always been there.
Yeah.
And this has always fueled a drive for a strong, centralized, sort of pyramidal power structure, typically emanating from Moscow.
Right, the center holding it all together.
Precisely. It's why someone like Putin really emphasizes the multinational state concept, and why he regularly consults with leaders of Russia's four traditional religions: Orthodox Christianity, Judaism, Tibetan Buddhism, and also the historically significant Shiite Islamic communities. It's all about reinforcing unity over, say, ethnic nationalism.
Okay, moving from geography then, let's delve into a really pivotal historical moment, one that profoundly reshaped Russian identity: the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because while we in the West were celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall, our source reveals that for many, many Russians, the 1990s were just traumatic catastrophe. Imagine immense economic hardship, rampant crime everywhere, a deep loss of national pride. There's even that story about the president reportedly being too drunk to exit planes during state visits. It paints a very, very different picture from our celebrations.
Oh, the contrast of that era is truly stark. You had professors selling their libraries on the street just to buy groceries, industries collapsing, widespread poverty, and yet, remarkably, no visible homelessness on a mass scale like you might expect.
How did that work?
It speaks to this unique deficit economy, where people would literally queue for unknown goods. A peculiar survival skill developed. You'd join a queue first, and then you'd ask what was actually being sold, just to ensure you had a spot for whatever valuable item might appear. Could be cubing oranges, maybe Czechoslovakian sneakers, anything.
Wow. It's almost hard to imagine that level of daily grind, isn't it?
Yeah, that kind of resourcefulness, forged in scarcity, it really speaks volumes about the Russian spirit, or at least the spirit of that specific era.
And this kind of survival, it must have bred a unique relationship with authority, too. Almost cynical. People learning to trust themselves, their immediate networks, far more than the government. The Russian author, Mikhail Shishkin, observed something quite chilling in Russia. Power is that you can lie unpunished.
Hmm. How does that specific dynamic, where the leader lies, everyone knows it, but it's kind of accepted, how does that contribute to this idea of strong, centralized power? That's a really powerful way to frame their approach, I think. The common understanding, as Shishkin points out, is that the official narrative isn't always, let's say, strictly true. And the leader is aware that everyone knows this. It's a shared awareness. Yet this very act, this open secret, it actually projects power. It reinforces the image of a strong father figure, someone capable of holding the vast country together despite everything.
A strong hand, even if built on something shaky.
Exactly. It's a survival mentality that's become deeply ingrained. Citizens are expected to understand and sort of adhere to the official line, even if they don't personally believe it. Play the game. It helps explain why Putin is so often credited, genuinely credited by many Russians, for restoring pride and improving living standards after 2000, for bringing some order to the chaos of the 90s. That's something many genuinely appreciate.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit then, connect this to how Russia views the current geopolitical landscape, particularly the conflict in Ukraine. The narrative we hear from Russia isn't really about an invasion of Ukraine itself, but framed more as a defensive war against NATO's eastward expansion. And they often see the European Union as just sort of NATO's economic arm. That's a stark contrast to the Western perspective, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And one immediate question that comes up is that famous claim about NATO's expansion by 1,000 kilometers to the east. Now, historians still debate whether a formal, explicit agreement not to expand was ever actually made back then.
Right, that's still debated.
But the geopolitical reality is that power vacuums, they almost always get filled. Countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, they certainly chose to join NATO and the EU. That was their sovereign decision. But Russia unequivocally perceives this as a direct encroachment on its security zone, a perception that's maybe amplified by its own post-WWII expansion, which also shifted its borders westward quite significantly.
And this perception seems to fuel another key Russian accusation, that the West is hypocritical regarding international law. They're quick to point out instances where the United States itself hasn't exactly adhered strictly to the rules it promotes. Is this just rhetoric, a way to deflect, or do they genuinely believe this justifies their own actions on the world stage?
Well, the practical application of this perspective is quite telling, I think. Take the annexation of Crimea in 2014. That was an undisputed violation of international law, no question. Our expert, van der Swerd, suggests Russia may have consciously chosen this path, partly to demonstrate a belief that international law, well, that it simply doesn't apply to them in the same way, that they are, in a sense, above it, mirroring perhaps how they perceive other powerful nations like the U.S. sometimes act.
So it's a calculated move to assert a different kind of global standing.
It certainly looks that way, a very deliberate signal.
Considering all this, then, what drives Russia's apparent need for external conflict? Is it solely about Ukraine right now, or is there a deeper ongoing requirement?
That's an excellent point. I think it ties back to some things we discussed earlier, that profound historical fear of disintegration.
The sheer size, the diversity.
Exactly. Combined with this deep-seated, almost messianic self-image of Russia as a unique civilization, maybe even a third Rome, carrying some special destiny. So when there's internal strife or economic difficulty, an external threat provides a powerful rallying point, a common enemy.
It unites the people.
It's a mechanism to unite those diverse populations under a strong leader, reinforcing that central pyramidal power structure we talked about. So yes, if the Ukraine conflict were to freeze, it's highly likely Russia would seek another hotspot. It needs that tension. Perhaps in Central Asia, maybe Transnistria again, or Georgia.
So it's not about conquering Western Europe.
No, the analysis suggests it's not about World War III or some grand conquest of Western Europe. It's more about small, limited meddling at the borders. Pinpricks. Actions designed to serve these dual internal propaganda needs and reinforce that historical narrative of being besieged but strong. I mean, the history since the Soviet collapse is just full of such conflicts. Chechnya, Georgia, Nagorno-Karabakh, then Crimea, now Ukraine.
Right, there's a pattern. Okay, let's bring this closer to home then and think about Europe's strategic position in all this. With the current focus on rearmament, this feeling of perhaps inevitable conflict, what's the best path forward for Europe? Our source actually argues that an independent European defense force was probably an inevitable development anyway, regardless of the current tensions with Russia.
Yeah, stepping back to consider the broader implications, the U.S. is quite clearly shifting its strategic priorities towards the Pacific. That's been happening for a while, which means Europe simply cannot forever rely on the U.S. umbrella for its defense in the same way it has. So in a strange way, the current tension with Russia, while obviously alarming, it actually accelerates Europe's necessary process of strengthening its own military capacity.
An unintended consequence, perhaps.
Perhaps, and yes, NATO, like any alliance really, often benefits from having a perceived enemy to help justify defense spending. That's just the nature of alliances. And Russia's pinpricks in the Baltic or the North Seas, they certainly contribute to that narrative. But the crucial distinction our source makes is that Russia actively organizes military conflicts right at its own borders. That's a practice NATO explicitly avoids.
That's a key difference. Now, here's a challenging perspective our expert offers. The call for dialogue with Russia. Even amidst the widespread, understandable demonization of Putin, can that kind of engagement truly be possible, especially given the history and the actions we've just discussed?
I believe the argument is that it has to be considered. It's not about condoning actions, not at all. It's about understanding motivations. Instead of only demonizing, the argument goes, a more productive long-term approach is to attempt to grasp the other side's perspectives, their perceived incentives, their fears. Van der Swerde believes, for instance, that any eventual resolution to the Ukraine conflict will likely, almost certainly, involve territorial concessions from Ukraine, which is a harsh reality, but one he suggests the West may have implicitly calculated all along, despite the strong public rhetoric about Ukraine belonging to Europe or Ukrainians being family.
That's a very sobering thought. So, considering everything we've discussed, the history, the identity, the geopolitics, what might the future hold for Russia's relationship with Europe? Can Russia ever truly be a full European country in the way we often think about it?
That's such a vital question, isn't it? Russia often positions itself not just as European, but as the other Europe, sometimes even the better Europe. The one that's supposedly preserved traditional Christian values while the West allegedly abandoned them. That's a common narrative there.
Right, the defender of tradition.
Exactly. Now, realistically, for a country of Russia's sheer size and complexity to become, say, a member of the EU, that seems highly unrealistic, probably impossible. But a strong cooperative relationship. As history has shown at various points, it's absolutely possible. It's happened before. Culturally, Russia is just so deeply intertwined with Europe. It's given us giants like Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, incredible novelists. When you walk through St. Petersburg, you are undoubtedly in a European city, architecturally, aesthetically, and yet you consistently encounter these profound differences, these things that remind you constantly of its unique, distinct identity. It's both familiar and alien.
Yeah, this deep dive has certainly painted a picture of Russia that's far beyond any simple caricature, hasn't it? It really is a country living this profound paradox, shaped by that immense geography, a truly traumatic recent history, and this deeply ingrained survival mentality. It feels both intimately familiar, maybe through its art and culture, and yet profoundly distinct, almost alien in its geopolitical outlook.
That's precisely it. And the very idea of drawing some clear, hard line between Europe and Asia, whether you put it at the Elbe River, the Irder, or the Ural Mountains, it's inherently a construct. It's something we impose. Russia, in a fundamental sense, seems to constantly embody that dividing line. It lives out that fascinating, sometimes frightening tension of being both intimately connected and profoundly different.
So as you, our listener, reflect on the headlines and the narratives about Russia from now on, maybe consider the layers we've tried to uncover in this deep dive. Think about how readily we, maybe all humans, tend to simplify complex nations, create these others. Perhaps the real challenge isn't just to understand Russia, but maybe to apply that same intellectual curiosity, that same search for nuance to every nation and every narrative we encounter. To always push beyond the surface. What new questions does this exploration spark for you?